the better thing is to try to have objective standards and fail trying. It's better that we got the definition wrong and we learned we got the definition wrong than if we had no definitions, because definitions will always occur. And I'm glad that there are two genders, even if maybe the definitions were a little bit broad. But the short truth is Idaho now has with a law that says there are only two genders, and it'll be really interesting to see how that applies to the judicial system and the benefits I think it'll bring for Idahoans. Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the Local Yokel Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. Those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little bit of banter before we get into the stories. I understand, though, if you're short on time, so we've provided timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the stories that you're interested in. With that said, welcome everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful week, or I should say had, because past tense and all the fun things there. I know for myself, it's definitely been a busy one, and also the Idaho weather here in the Treasure Valley, which, again, being typical Idaho and talking about weather, seems to have gone all over the place. The first half of last week was cold and windy, and it felt like winter had come back. And then by the end of the week, I was like, why did I have any of my overcoats or trench coats in the back of the seat of my car? It was super warm walking back this Friday. So that's been nice. But with that said, I also have John co-hosting with me again today.
I am here. And yeah, for me, I don't know if I've ever said, wow, it's too cold.
Well, I mean, most of the time I feel like Idaho has doubled the amount of winter than it does summer. So that's beneficial for both of us. Don't get me wrong, I like a little warmth, but if I have to choose between it being a little too cold or a little bit more nippy, right, or being too warm, I'm going to take a little too cold because I can always put a jacket on. I can always do something else. If it's hot, it's like, okay, I either swim or go into AC, and then I'm like, what am I doing now?
Well, my rule of thumb has always been you can always add more layers. But there comes a point when you've taken off all of the layers that you can, and either you're in your own home or you're going to get arrested.
Yes, this is true. This is very true.
Yeah, no, we had a good week. I've been doing a lot of working, been, putting out stories, doing a lot of work with the interview that you did with
Scott Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland. Gosh, I'm having a hard time coming up with his name. Yeah, Scott Cleveland. I really enjoyed listening to your conversation. He's an interesting guy.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know much about him. So if any of our listeners haven't gone and taken a listen to that, you should
something up in the corners
after listening to this. Yeah, you should thumb your way over to that and take a look at it. Yeah, we'll have to add a card.
Yeah, it's like a thing. It will pop out. Well,
click on
my
that
orientation
or
be
that.
like there or something. I don't know.
Click on the thing. I don't know what it is. Whatever. I'll figure it out later.
We're professionals here, ladies and gentlemen. Very professional.
Yep.
No, the interview, I quite enjoyed it. It wasn't quite what I expected going into it, but I was pleasantly surprised. I definitely will say from some of the other material and stuff, you get a certain feel from the guy, but getting done with that interview, and obviously for you, the viewer, it'd be interesting to hear that feedback as well. Did the interview change your mind? Did you have a certain idea of him from all the different posters or maybe things you've seen, and then when listening to the interview kind of got a different one? Because that was kind of my take. Originally, I had a certain feeling. Obviously, I'd seen him speak at like Lincoln Day and a couple other things, but then actually being able to sit down and have a conversation with him, it was really good. And I think for anyone that's over there in District 2, which, recap, not to get too far into the weeds, but you have Legislative District 1, Legislative District 2. Are you in 1? Basically, if you're in the western half of the state all the way up to north, then you're probably in 1. If you're in the eastern half of the state or the east side of Boise and some of that area, then there's a pretty good chance you're in the 2nd district, which is the one he's running in.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I thought, and I was trying to look it up to... Yeah, there it is, adagop.com. Ada GOP released a press release on April 5 where Ada County Republican Central Committee meeting held on April 4th, 2024. The Central Committee voted to endorse Scott Cleveland for the U.S. House of Representatives in Idaho's Congressional District 2 in the Republican primary. So I thought that was interesting. He said Ada County, and he said
a couple others. I can't remember them.
A couple other Republican committees have endorsed Cleveland over Mike Simpson, which take it for what you will.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of the GOP as a whole, but that's interesting. It's interesting to me that the GOP is endorsing the one who's not the incumbent. It means something. I don't know what it means, but it means something.
Very, very, very true. But I don't have too much to add because most of this week I was working a ton on some different things and stuff. A lot of driving, but sadly it was not outside the Treasure Valley. I love the Treasure Valley. No one come to my door. I love it. I love it. But if I have a choice sometimes for driving, and most people know what I mean, I would more than willingly be driving up in Cascade or Emmett or somewhere else other than the Treasure Valley traffic, which it has its ebbs and flows.
Traffic is no fun to drive in at all. And also, if you're going to drive for 2 or 3 hours, the hope is that you go somewhere instead of, just drive in circles all day, which apparently you did earlier this week. And that sucks. So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so driving on that, when I drive here in Idaho, you have this, you have the length of the freeway across the Treasure Valley. And if you drive it enough, during certain times, you learn where the eddies or pileups occur.
Yep.
And so weirdly enough, you can kind of predict which lane's going to slow down. And so you're driving and then you're like, oh, I need to move over here, predictably, here, whatever.
Yep.
And so I feel bad for people who haven't learned that yet because they're just like, Yeah. They keep getting stuck in any of it. Can it just be a straight line?
Yeah. Speaking of straight line driving, my favorite and fastest I've ever driven in my life. My wife's younger brother was getting married, and he was getting married up in Colorado. We were living down in Albuquerque at the time. He was getting married on Saturday afternoon, and so my wife and her sister were going to drive up there on Friday morning. I was working Friday, but we only worked half days, so I was going to leave, around 1 or 2 o'clock and get up there in the evening. It was about a 5-hour drive, so, it wasn't going to be too bad. And I like driving. I had a fun car to drive, and so I'm driving north on 25. We get north of Santa Fe, and then I see behind me coming up, just burning up behind me. And I'm watching this guy. He's getting closer and closer. And then as he passes me, I look over. I'm like, you have a radar detector. Pedal to the metal, baby. And so, I gunned it. Oh, dude, we were doing, I think it was like, we were doing 115 for an hour. Just driving north on 25. Dude, it was great. Oh my gosh.
Besides an aircraft, I can never say on this terrestrial sphere I have done 100 yet. One of these days.
It's fun. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I think the closest I've gotten, there was a stretch of road I was driving in Nebraska and the speed limit was 90. And so I was doing like 94.
Yeah.
With the cruise control.
Yeah.
But at that point, I think when we hit that stretch through Nebraska, it was like, I want to say like 9 p.m. and we had left at 5 a.m. from Boise. And so it was kind of like, all right, could I, in theory, hit this theoretical amazing thing, which is 100 miles an hour? Or I'm in the dark. There may be animals. Idaho instinct kicked in.
Yeah.
Do I want to hit something at 100 miles an hour? And so I just said, nope, it is going to be 94, floodlights on as bright as they'll go, and we'll just pray.
Yeah, I don't play around with nighttime driving. I will drive fast during the day, but man, it hits nighttime and I ain't playing around with that. It's one of the reasons, honestly, I like driving at night because I don't speed.
I just love that at night you can set your cruise and go miles and miles and miles and just sit there and you can almost have like one hand on the wheel and just think about life, listen to music or whatever. It's the most peaceful form of driving.
Honestly, I don't remember the last time I actually drove with 2 hands on the wheel. Also, I have an incredibly long torso, so I end up like laying back in cars and just like, it's like riding a Harley.
Right.
But,
those things are the most annoying things in the road. They're the bumblebees of the highway.
I want one. I want one badly.
Careful, John.
Harleys are expensive, though.
Careful.
Well, I've got a
just get a dual
Honda.
sport. Then you can drive it on the freeway and take it out in the backcountry.
Yeah, no, I know. I've talked with a couple guys about it, and they sound like they're fun. But I don't know, man. There's something about riding a hog. It just,
You want the rumble.
I'm all about that cruiser. Also, I watched Sons of Anarchy, and, you know, I can ride around on a cruiser and imagine myself being an outlaw. I'm like, yeah, I could do crimes.
Please don't,
Yeah.
John. We want you to be a host on the show, not in prison.
I mean, I'm sure we could work something out.
Me and you are more likely to probably end up in prison for being Christian extremists than we are for breaking any law.
Well, that's true.
With the way things are going.
The worst laws I break at this point are I rarely use my blinker.
Well, I mean, those pronouns, if you ever go to Britain. Oh, no, John.
Yeah. Well, there have been a
Couple of arrests.
Yeah, that's been an issue. Speaking of pronouns, though, that's going to bring us into our first story.
Yes, it will.
Segueing. It happened.
Yeah, that definitely does transition us well. Our first segment here is Idaho Bill Breakdown, House Bill 421, only 2 sexes. So welcome back again to the Idaho Bill Breakdown. In this series, we've been going through breaking down the bills that have been signed into law after the 2024 session. Last week, we talked about the new driver's license law, where parents can actually help a little bit with teaching their children, but only in rural areas. Check that out if you want to learn more. But in this segment, we'll be looking at something that is also related to families, men and women. This bill is very simple on its face. Men are men and women are women. But there's a little bit more to it. We'll be discussing how this bill defines men and women and what it means for you and your everyday life in Idaho. So, John, you want to first break down what the bill says?
Yeah, so the stated purpose of this bill is actually super short, so I'm just going to read it here. Providing a legal definition for male and female and related terms, and providing consistency across state statute. So the following are definitions that this bill defines. So it defines sex as an individual's biological sex, either male or female. Defines male as an individual who has male reproductive anatomy, and defines female as an individual who has female reproductive anatomy. And then it defines gender as a synonym for sex when referring to males, females, or biological differences between the sexes. So it's really simple, but sadly in today's day and age, we kind of need these definitions to happen. And the effects are actually a lot further reaching than you might think at first glance, mainly in the legal sphere. These definitions are what are going to be used in the courtrooms, I guess, until they get changed. Hopefully not ever, but that's where we're going to see the majority of this bill's work happening, is in those legal in that legal realm. So then the next question is how is this different from what it used to be? So Idaho law didn't have clear, consistent definitions for these terms across different sections of code. There was also a bit of ambiguity around the legal meanings of sex versus gender identity, which, I mean, that wasn't a problem until a couple of years ago, but apparently it's now a problem because we're confused. Someone's confused. I'm confused. We're all confused about something.
We live in a confused world now. Tradition, sadly, which I'm not saying tradition's always right. I'm not saying appeal to tradition. All those people out there that study. Oh, that song. My sister's been going on and on about it lately. Any minute you say tradition, she'll start singing it. Anywho.
I mean, isn't that just the tradition? Gosh, I'm going to have to pull in a
Man, that's just like a whole Mimi thing. Now John's going to pull in just a thing. It's like a clip so we don't get copyright struck.
I was going to say, I'm pulling in Tavia there, and it's just going to happen.
Right.
But anyway, continue.
So yeah, point in case, after that funny little bit from John, I think a lot of the confusion, sadly, sometimes comes to a kind of a loss or tradition that in the past, we as a culture, even if you didn't know a certain term or something, you could fall back on tradition to a sense to be like, well, this is how we've always done it, so we'll do it this way. This is the traditional understood thing. Now, with that said, for anybody out there that's taken logic class, please do not crucify. I'm not saying always appeal to tradition, but it was a really good guiding post. But in modern American culture and Western culture, we've kind of gotten to the point of saying, no, culture, what are you talking about? Culture's bad, tradition's bad. We need to reinvent absolutely everything, which that's its own bad thing in some ways, that there's points where you don't need to reinvent every single wheel. But specifically with this, when we're getting into these definitions, the question that kind of arises is, are these definitions valid? And I would say, yes, men and women are different. It has achieved that end very, very well. To say, no, there are just men and there are women. They are different, but there are only two genders. There aren't a gazillion genders, aren't all these things, but in a legal sense, you can only have two categories, male and female. That's built more of how it used to be seen. But when we get into the other area of more the classical view, which is kind of where I want to focus on, then I feel like these definitions here do fall a little short and could have gone a little further, particularly in the sense of that, yes, we are matter. We do have different anatomy. Men and women do. That does set us apart. But we're not just anatomy. If you could sit there in some scientific world and perfectly replicate those body or anatomy, different anatomy parts on a human being, then according to this law, then yeah, you could change your gender. And then you have kind of an issue, especially when we live in an age where trickery and foolery and fakery, especially with AI and certain other things, is greater. And so if we're coming back to that more classical definition, we're both body and soul. We are not just physical. We have two sides of that. And that independent of, even if you could change the body, you have a soul that is either male or female, or if you are uncomfortable with that, a personality, that women have a certain disposition of how they interact with the world, how they interact with people, how they perceive, how they problem solve, and vice versa for men. We do as well. And both of those are wonderful and beautiful things, but independent of we have broken anatomy or you try to change that anatomy, a man is still a man and a woman is still a woman. And so I feel like that definition kind of does fall a little bit short that it currently has.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, honestly, this bill falls, at least as far as I'm concerned, it falls under the category of it's a good start.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. There's so much more to men and women than just anatomy. And I'm going to scroll back up to those. As an individual who has male reproductive anatomy, at this moment, you can do, you can have a bottom surgery or a top surgery, and it will change the physical bits that you have.
We're going to be family friendly here. Don't worry.
Right. That's what I said. I said bits.
Yes.
You can get a hysterectomy and remove reproductive bits, anatomy. I guess I could use the word anatomy because it's like right there in front of me. But that, I guess that gets away from the real definition, like you're talking about. It doesn't matter the anatomy that you have. It's,
well, to a degree it does, a small, but it's not the whole.
No. Okay. So it doesn't matter. Okay, hold on. It does. The anatomy is a reflection of who you are as God made you. I guess what I mean by that is it doesn't matter if you've had a hysterectomy, or if you don't have
Maybe
all
have
of
a
the
birth defect or
reproductive
something.
parts. If you have a birth defect or something, because that's one of the things that gets brought up when you start talking about anatomy. Is the first retort is, well, what about old women who've gone through menopause? Well, just because you've gone through menopause and you don't have the ability to have babies, that doesn't mean that you didn't have those parts. Well, what about women that were born with birth defects and can't? Well, just because you were born with birth defects and can't doesn't mean that you are a part of the gender that has the ability to have babies. Like, yes, there's a defect. Yeah, we don't define things by what are defects. Defects are just that.
If a Ford F-150 comes off the production line and has a defect, it doesn't automatically become a van and not a truck. It's still a truck, but it has a defect.
Exactly. And you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And so that's where, I think this is a good first step. I like the bill. I think it's good. I think it adds definitions in a place where definitions sorely need to be made. You look at sporting events and sports, and gosh, this is a really big issue right now, with boys and men trying to play in women's sports.
Right.
And so, now as a state, we can tell our universities and we can tell our lower education and anything else, look, if it's a female sport, we now have a definition for female.
Right.
And if you are a male, well, female sport. Now, if females want to play in male sports, that's typically male sports aren't a thing. It's just sports and female sports. And that's that. It is what it is.
I'm looking forward, if there's someone that gets mad at that in the comments, me and John are going to have a very fun time. Just going to preface that, reading your comment, if you're frustrated with that.
Right?
But
honestly, I mean, on that topic of comments, honestly, comment away. I am more than happy to talk about these things. I enjoy the conversation. As long as the conversation is coming from a position of we want to move forward, because I understand the fact that people want to be compassionate to other people, and some people have issues, and we want to address those. We want to help people, and I think that's one of the problems that we on the right side of the aisle, or on the conservative side of the spectrum, one of the problems that we have is oftentimes we don't appear to actually care about people because we draw hard lines and we point to truth.
Right.
But the difference is that by pointing to truth and saying, no, there is truth, there is something that is absolutely true, and you don't have to believe it, but your belief in this thing doesn't matter. That thing is true. And when your life deviates from that, things go sideways. That compassionate and loving thing to do is to tell people who are deviating from that truth, to point them back to truth and say, no, that's what is true. And if you think that changing truth is going to solve the problem, then you're not going to solve the problem.
Well,
the problem is going to persist.
As Jordan Peterson sometimes will say, and I think it's a great analogy, is, can you sit there and for a certain amount of time grab reality, grab the truth and like bend it? Yeah. But the longer you hold it, the bigger the whiplash will be, because it will inevitably snap back. Inevitably, you won't be able to bend it anymore, and it will come back. And the longer you've held it for, the harder it will whiplash back to you, and the recoil will be from those actions.
And we're seeing that we're seeing that whiplash with the feminist movement right now. There's a whole bunch of women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are sad and lonely because they didn't have children. There's a whole bunch of men that are getting into their 30s, 40s, and 50s and saying, wow, I really want to start a family. And of course, those men who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s are looking at women in their 20s and going, I'm going to start a family with you because you're young and hot, and also young, so you can have children for a while. And women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s are just getting left behind. And it sucks. It's really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes me hurt.
But there are, much as we want to be loving, and obviously we wouldn't leave any person like that out in the cold, and we give our greatest sympathy and stuff, but there's a certain level, and I may have mentioned this in the show, but I've mentioned it in person, that there's consequences for your actions. I can sit there, I can comfort you through those trials, I can support you and be with you there, but there comes a point where you dug that grave, you're in that spot, and that's one of the consequences, and you're going to have to live with that, because as much as, I mean, greatly for my generation, my generation lives and has grown up in a world of, well, I could just hit the undo button, or I can hit the quick save, or I can reload because we live so much in video games or digital land. But life isn't that way. There's certain things that aren't do-overs. Yeah, there's a lot that you could sit there and like pick yourself up, try again, and that's why there's the encouragement of try again. There's a lot of things you could do that. Talking to a person, there's always more people to talk to. You can keep building your skills. That's an example of that. But there's certain things, especially with like if you chose not to have a family and you chose for multiple years not to have a family and you've missed that window, especially for women, that's just something you're going to have to live with because you made that choice day after day, 365 days a year for several years. That's not something you easily, for lack of a better word, do. It's something you consciously do.
It's the F around and find out chart. It's a real thing.
Right.
And like you said, I'd not heard that quote from Peterson before, but that's a good one. The longer you mess around, the harder it is you're going to find out. And it sucks. It really does. which is why, again, going back to why I originally brought this up, is the most compassionate thing that we can do is point to reality and point to truth and say, that's true. You should abide by that.
The better thing is to try to have objective standards and fail trying. For conservatives that sit there and say, well, what if we get the definition wrong? It's better that we got the definition wrong and we learned we got the definition wrong than if we had no definitions, because definitions will always occur. If you try to sit there respectfully to any libertarian out there listening and you say, well, the government needs to get away, it doesn't matter if you remove one authority or one power structure, another one will take its place. There will always be some authority. The question, do you have a just authority? Do you have a good authority? Same with these definitions. Do you have a correct definition or a wrong definition? We should strive to do the correct one. We're going to fail in that, but it's better to strive for it. And in that, bringing it kind of back to Idaho and out of the top part, right, where we're breaking down these definitions, because, oh man, I love to go into definitions and I can go on huge rambles about them. What does this mean for Idaho? This bill is passed. This has been done. How is this going to affect you as an Idahoan? And the biggest thing I would say that you're going to see probably affect it is on the legal side of it. That you're not going to have a bunch of squabbling back and forth and these definitions being vague. When you have concrete, this is this, that is that, then in these different school things with bathrooms and different things, be it maybe in the stuff with the explicit material in libraries, all of this. Now, in the eyes of the state, right, this vocabulary, this case law, the way that the law works, those are the eyes. That is the dictionary of how the judicial system of Idaho looks at things. In the eyes of the state, you are either a man or a woman, and there is nothing else. And for me personally, believing on a more traditional Christian view that has lasted for 2,000 years plus now, even before that, depending on your way you look at religion, I think it's only been a beneficial thing for society for us to have that bedrock of male and female, and then the nuclear family, which then builds the fundamental building block of our community. And if we can safeguard that more, that's where you're going to see that change. So it's these little minor things. Like someone says, it's the small things in life. Perfect example of that here.
Yeah, baby steps. We talked about it last week. You got to take baby steps. And until you learn how to walk, you can't run. So see how many more dumb sayings could I get in there? But yeah,
we just have a counter. Ding, 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 ding.
Right. Yeah. No, I like it. It's a good start. I like I said, it's a great place to start. We can continue to further define things, and that's great. But I like where we're at. It's a good thing.
Yeah, so pulling it all together. With that said, I know we probably might have sounded a little harsh, but to whoever sponsored the bill and wrote it up, thank you. They should get the praise that is due. I think it's really, really great we have this, and I think it'll be something that will be beneficial, be it if it's added on or adjusted on the time. It is better to have it. I'm glad that there are two genders, even if maybe the definitions were a little bit broad on the male and female side of it, and I understand that's a little bit of a tricky topic to obviously even get through a legislature because there's a lot of people that have a lot of different viewpoints. But the short truth is, cool, Idaho now has with a law that says there are only two genders, and it'll be really interesting to see how that applies to the judicial system and the benefits I think it'll bring for Idahoans. Hey there, since you made it to this, you probably enjoy the show. And that probably means you want to keep up with all things Idaho. So don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button. And if you want to see all of our content in one place and or support us, we recommend you check out our locals page. It is a place for all things local, yokel, Idaho, and so much more. Not to mention, if you found our content valuable and think it might benefit others, please like and share it. Your shares and likes can help us spread the news about our beautiful state. Thank you for your support and for being part of the local yokel Idaho community. Together, hopefully, we can keep Idaho informed, engaged, and involved in this wonderful state. Now, let's dive back into the show. Diving into something, why are dams so important in Idaho? In a recent interview, which I teased above, I just did with Scott Cleveland, we talked about how the federal and local level, there are people who want to get rid of a huge amount of Idaho's dams along the Snake River. In this segment, we'll be going into how dams are one of Idaho's hidden powers and how getting rid of them would have horrible effects on the environment, Idaho, and the whole West. So first off, John, would you like to break down what the dams, how they are kind of a hidden power for Idaho?
I can. So one metric we need to know to give us proper perspective is how Idaho's power grid relates to other states in the union. The ways you measure the quality or reliability can be boiled down to 3 metrics: reliability, cleanliness, and cost. So for the first one, reliability, Idaho has one of the most reliable power grids in the nation, which is kind of great for us. Our grid ranks among the top states for the fewest minutes of power outages experienced by customers per year. For the second one, cleanliness, we generate a high percentage of this electricity from clean, renewable sources. In 2022, 75% of Idaho's power came from renewables, the 4th highest share in the nation. And then finally, cost. Now, we boast some of the cheapest electricity prices in the country, with prices averaging between 8 to 10 cents per kilowatt hours in recent years, roughly half the national average. In fact, depending on the website you look at, we have either the 3rd or the 5th lowest average rates in the U.S. So with that, let's look at what Idaho's dams do. So they provide over 50% of the in-state electricity generation, one of the highest percentages in the nation. We have over 140 existing hydroelectric plants with a combined capacity of nearly 2,000 megawatts with the Hells Canyon complex, one of the dams that is wanted to be removed, actually. Now, these dams not only generate electricity, but they also provide flood control, irrigation, and recreational opportunities. Hydropower is a clean energy source that helps reduce reliance on fossil fuels, making Idaho's largest source of renewable energy. So really the question here that we want to ask is, what would be the effect of getting rid of them?
So first off, the dams that they're wanting to remove are on the lower Snake River. So we're going to kind of focus on those. If removed, they would have huge effects. Firstly, something I didn't know about until recently, is it would disturb the barge transportation of agricultural commodities like wheat, which if you watched our segment on the different types of exports that we do here in Idaho, we do a lot of wheat, which usually goes to the port of Lewiston. Didn't know it. I know it's a port, but I didn't know it was that big for that type of thing. This would lead to major increases in shipping costs and prices, which we already have enough of those. Secondly, breaching the dams would require expensive upgrades to road and rail infrastructure to handle this increase in traffic. The total mitigation cost, according to a research paper done on this topic, could range from $10 to $31 billion. So, the federal government usually does that, but we would kind of have to do that a little bit as well, unless Joe Biden wants to shake out the piggy bank again. Thirdly, removing dams would eliminate irrigation for over 47,000 acres of farmland that rely on dams and reservoirs. And fourthly, Idaho would lose 1,000 megawatts of reliable power. That flexible hydropower generation helps balance the intermediate wind and solar, and replacing it with other clean energy sources would be costly, because we know clean energy is usually not the cheapest. And lastly, dam removal would likely have limited benefits for the salmon recovery, the main argument being made for removing the dams, compared to other factors like ocean conditions, habitat loss, and predation, according to the research paper that I quoted earlier. So that kind of brings us into our application breakdown. We gave you all this data and kind of summarizing it up, and if you're someone who's listened to a little bit, you probably already can guess what my first point is going to be, and the question is environment or man? Is man made for creation, or is creation made for man? And there again, if you listen for a bit, you'll probably know where I'm going to go with this. Creation is made for man not for creation. That, yes, we love creation. It's given to us to take care of and be good stewards of. But on the flip side, we are not to serve creation. Creation was made for enjoyment for us, and honestly it does better, would be my argument. Granted, I don't have all those notes right now, but the best example I can give is in places where we see with California, where yes, the environment is served more than mankind's needs. Dams are removed, they don't touch it at all, they just let nature do itself. We serve it, we leave it alone, we are the scourge, we are the problem. Well, what happens? They get a bunch of wildfires, everything starts burning to the ground, they have power issues, drought issues, different stuff. But when man properly takes care of creation, being proper forestry, cleaning it out, controlled burns, even the Indians, in recent terms, they usually are portrayed as big tree huggers. Even they regularly set fire to things to have control burns, specifically to the point that there was almost a mild little war that happened with the American settlers with the Indians, because they set fire to the prairies, because they had always done that for years and years so they wouldn't have mass fires, and the settlers thought they were trying to burn them out, and they made them stop. And then, I can't remember the exact historical thing, but then you had a huge fire that engulfed most of the Midwest at one point because no one was doing the controlled burns. So that would be my first point with this.
Yeah, which does make me laugh that we're so quick to point to some aspects of people and say that they're the people most worthy of looking up to, and then we stop at that. And yeah, it's because it's all self-serving. And what's interesting is a lot of times when you talk about these issues with people who want to save the environment, that we as humans need to like completely remove ourselves from everything. What you find out is that a lot of those are actually just kind of self-serving beliefs that people dive into and drive into because it gives them a sense of purpose. And that's simplifying a lot. And, you know, and I'm perfectly happy to dive into that and have more conversations, because I haven't really given that thought much thought. But
I mean, in all fairness, I'm even guilty of it in a weird way. I can relate to give grounds, because sometimes we can look at people who really love the environment or kind of crazy about it as just being cuckoo and crazy as conservatives sometimes. But like, if I sit there comes a point of maybe there was a lake where I enjoyed going fishing or whatever. And slowly over time, there's more and more people and more boats get on the water, and it gets more choppy. It's hard to fish. All these different factors that start adding up that you can directly point to humans doing that disturb that. And my level of what I associate with fishing and the lack of humanity being an enjoyment, right? I can look at that negatively. Vice versa, you know, a bunch of homes going in, which mean there's more image bearers of God, that they get to have more housing, to have families, to be fruitful. I should be joyful. But then even like a couple of days ago, I was driving down the road, and the area that I'm in, they're building a ton of houses like anywhere in the Treasure Valley. And I saw this one killdeer fly over. My brain instantly went, oh, those dang houses, all those killdeer, they're not going to be around too much more. And then I had to sit back and think, wait a second. No,
Hold on.
Wait. That is exactly, being sympathetic there, that's exactly what the environmentalist does. They have a really good association, and it's not a negative thing. They sit there and think and remember other things that they love.
Yeah.
In that, maybe that killdeer example or whatever. And differently, I will sit back and be like, no, wait a second. What's more important, the houses with the family and the image bearers of God, or is it the killdeer? No, the killdeer, there's going to be tons of land on this God green earth. God's going to take care of the killdeer just as he takes care of me. And it's fine for those houses as long as we're not being, you know, brutal or overbearing about it. And to be good stewards of those killdeers, but that there's a time and place, and that heartfelt thing is a good thing. And that's why we have natural reserves within neighborhoods and stuff.
Yeah.
You see that in Boise. And I think that's a really good thing to have those parks like Albertsons parks.
Yeah.
But when it goes too far with like these dams, where we get into an issue of the image versus reality, what we have in our head, be it reality, like the example of, oh, dirty coal spewing manufacturing line. But then you find out that factory that's spewing all that smoke and soot into the air, they're actually making the different chemicals for like a medical treatment process that's helping people get over cancer. And so you're like, wait a second, the image looks bad, but what is the reality of what this thing's after doing? Yeah, you might look at a dam and that image it's not letting the natural flow. Whenever you see nature naturally flow, it takes care of itself. It manages it well. Mankind's getting in the way, and it's damming and stopping the forces of water. But what's the reality? That there's actually more wildlife that can come to that area. They can migrate. They can have that. There's more recreation. There's more fish that have probably been in that square footage than there ever has been with that river. So we have to be careful about our image versus what reality actually is.
Yeah, which is really true. Well, and so then you have to start weighing the pros and cons. And this is something that we've talked about before is, you know, what are the benefits of, because shoot, there are benefits of removing the dams. You might get better salmon. You might get a better environment. That might be true. Also, you wouldn't have to listen to people complaining about the dams anymore because they're gone. Now, the negative, and you've mentioned some of them, is, well, now we got to burn something for energy.
Right.
That's not good. Well, now we have to find another way to better regulate water flow. Well, I guess we're going to put a dam in somewhere, maybe? I don't know. Like, how are we going to have our reservoirs? How are we going to do irrigation? All of these questions now have to be solved. And again, maybe there are good ways of solving those problems, but those issues have to be addressed before we move forward with removing the dam just because of some salmon.
Right.
And I mean, yes, that might sound a little harsh, but also I know there are ways to give salmon the ability to go around dams. It's a thing. We've done it. So maybe that's the better solution here is build the side passages where the salmon can go around the dam.
Right.
I mean, there you go. Problem solved. Moving on.
And if it saves us a tune of 13 to 30 billion, I don't feel like a concrete, slow, gradual climb that goes over by the side of the dam. All the land grants maybe you have to pay and the construction
Right.
and all the blasting maybe if you're somewhere right that you have to do that. You're going to tell me really that costs more than laying new rail lines, new road lines for all the movement of just the good transportation, let alone all the agricultural farmland. We have an issue in America. Gentleman that I love very much has told me about it. He does appraising work that sadly the farmland we have, it takes a lot to actually cultivate it. It's not just like you find ground and you plant it in. There's a lot of time and effort that's put to get that ground to be fruitful, to be able to produce, to be able to be nutrient rich. It takes several years, and there's certain areas it doesn't matter how much chemicals you pump into them, they can't do it. And so the farmland we have, we need to be very careful with, especially as the population grows. I'm not getting into that whole like population death thing that happened in the 70s and 80s, because I don't think that's going to happen at all. But we also still want to, as we're talking about, let's be good stewards. And if we already have this amazing water system that's able to divert all this water, the Treasure Valley wouldn't be nearly as green it is. If you're sitting there and enjoying in the Nampa Caldwell area, the Lake Low reservoir to go, that was specifically designed to be this intricate system of that you had Lucky Peak Dam that fed all the stuff near Boise, and then you had the New York Canal that shipped it all the way out west, and then it put it in Lake Lowell, which was a main hub to then distribute it out to the Owyhees and the other areas that didn't have a direct connection over to the Snake River.
Yeah, you would, in removing some of these dams, you would get rid of a lot of the, you would get rid of a lot of what makes Idaho such a great place. And so this is something that Mr. Cleveland talked about in the interview is the amount of coal or natural gas that would need to be burned to replace the power generated by some of these dams. And those figures blew my mind, and I'm not going to say it. I'll leave that for that interview. So go listen to the interview. But yeah, we would have to build more power plants to be able to provide that power. So
let alone the return on investment. We've already paid off the dams. If we build a new coal plant, if we build a new nuclear, we're going to have to pay for a whole stinking new thing. We've already paid for the dams. The dams are paid for.
Not only that, but you tell me, Mr. Environmentalist, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the dam and the reservoirs, or do you want to burn coal or natural gas, or do you want us to build nuclear power plants? Like what do you prefer? We need these things. Like, or do you want us to do you want us to buy a million solar panels from China and have them not work half the time because, well, it's dark for literally half the day, or not quite literally because we're north, but whatever. You get the point.
You get the point, yes.
And now we have to deal with power
generation,
storage and generation. And as much as you want to tell me that solar panels are clean, look into the production of them. They're not. They're nasty. Solar panels are not clean green energy. Neither are wind turbines, because you still have to make the stuff that goes onto the thing. You have to dig up materials. None of that happens. It just doesn't happen here. So we look at it and they're like, oh yeah, no, solar panels are clean because they're digging in China with coal power there. So
or not even that, but the reliability. How long can that solar panel sit outside and be generating power for? Or how long can you pay the money for a dam? And that dam, it's still there. It's still working. It's great. Yeah, you change some bearings. Yes, you're going to have to change the turbines and different things that go on. But how much easier and cheaper and affordable is it to upgrade and maintain those than it is solar panels, which... Here again, Idaho, American manufacturing. It's weird. As Americans, we can manufacture really, really big things easily. But when it comes to small things, we seem to struggle sometimes. It's kind of funny. But like solar panels, we don't do that much. But when it comes to a big, massive hydro engine in a dam or the turbine, forgive me, we didn't have the language there. It's kind of stalling. We can do that. That's something we can do here and be reliable, be self-sufficient. Not only the fact that we generate so much power from our hydro, a lot of it we sell. So if you wonder how Idaho is able to to a degree. The Idaho budget, I'm not getting into too much, they take a lot from the federal to keep it balanced. But the reason we're able to have more of a balanced budget is because we get a lot of revenue in from those dams. Not only are we generating power for ourselves, but we're generating revenue because the maintenance is so low.
So yeah, again, and you know, if you, a person who is advocating for the removal of these dams, can show me in raw numbers that it makes sense, well, sure, I might be all for it. I just think you're fighting an uphill battle, and it's not the case that removing the dams is going to be better.
Which, if you're someone,
but hey. Right? But hey, if you think that, let us know. Tell us in the comments.
Please
tell us why we're terribly wrong. Because, shoot, I could be very wrong. And I've changed opinions on several things, and this might be the latest one. But, you know, it's just not where I'm at yet.
It's better, like we talked about in our first story, it's better to seek after truth and fail in the attempt than not at all. It is way better for us to try. And so if you're getting mad with us for searching out the truth, that's where I think more of the issue lies. Please don't get frustrated with us trying to have a position, trying to use our reason to come to a conclusion. And if you have a better conclusion or a better argument than you think, there again, more welcome to reach out to us when we go in the closing, and in the description there'll be an email address, or you can send us over there on Twitter. But closing this all in, if you really love what we're talking about specifically in this segment and you really want to get nerdy, because obviously we have to keep this, under an hour. I'm guilty often when we record these things. The recording is way longer than what you guys end up seeing, because me and John have a talking habit, which is good. That's why we have a podcast. But if you really want to go deep, in the description, I will point it out, so John will make sure to highlight it or put it as accordingly. There was actually a very in-depth report that I want to say the Idaho legislator did, but it was some government agency in the state or maybe nationwide, looked at what would be the impact of getting rid of these dams. And some of the statistics we quoted were from that. So if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, I want to say it's a 22-page report, but you can go in and read that. Probably could do it in the evening if you're really passionate about this and wanting to be armed with it, because that report really does have some very interesting numbers, and it cites it quite well. So with that said, and speaking of closing things out, thank you for listening to the entire show. I sincerely hope you found it valuable and enjoyable. If we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter by tweeting me at LocalYokelIdaho. The small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.